Ever think about, like, how a state government agency can just be quietly shaping something as important as housing?
Right.
We're really diving deep into the Arizona Department of Housing today.
Yeah.
And honestly, you'd be surprised by how much impact they actually have.
Mm.
We're talking millions, even billions of dollars going towards all sorts of things, from helping veterans find homes to like navigating the whole world of manufactured housing.
Yeah.
It's way more interesting than it sounds, I'm telling you.
Absolutely. This deep dive, it's a fascinating look at how policy actually turns into real impact, on people's everyday lives.
Yeah, that's what we're here for.
Exactly.
We got these excerpts from a performance audit of this agency.
Okay.
Let me tell you, this is some dense stuff.
Yeah.
So what exactly is the Auditor General trying to figure out with this? What are the key things that we should be zeroing in on, at least for you?
So this audit is part of what Arizona calls a sunset review process.
Okay.
So basically, every few years, the legislature, they take this hard look at different agencies and they decide, okay, do we keep them around? Do we change them up? Or do we completely sunset them? Meaning, they're gone.
Wow.
High stakes.
I didn't know that about Arizona's government. That's interesting.
Yeah.
So it's like this big evaluation to see if the department's actually making a difference or not.
Exactly. They're evaluating like how effective and how efficient the department is being, and particularly how well their performance management system is working. Like, are they actually using our tax dollars wisely, and are they actually achieving what they're supposed to be doing? That's what the Auditor General is trying to figure out.
Okay, so this isn't just about bean counting. Like,
Right.
this is actually about whether or not the department is delivering on what they're supposed to be doing for the people of Arizona.
Exactly.
So what did they find? Any big surprises for you?
There were definitely some interesting findings. One key issue that they found was that the department really needs a better system for measuring how effective its programs actually are.
Okay.
Imagine trying to build a house, right, without having a blueprint.
Right.
That's kind of what the department is doing here.
Wow.
They don't have very well-defined goals or ways to actually track if they're meeting them.
So they need a clear picture of, like, what does success even look like? And how do we actually measure that?
Precisely. They need clearer goals, a way to track not just how much money they're spending,
Right.
but what are the actual outcomes of that spending,
Right.
and then use that data to make their programs better. For instance, the audit found that they haven't actually been systematically tracking how much they're spending on permanent supportive housing, which is super crucial for helping people escape homelessness for good.
It makes you wonder, like, how many other programs might not be working as well as they could be simply because there's no real way of knowing.
Right?
Speaking of spending, this audit uncovered a pretty shocking incident, didn't it? $2 million just gone.
Yeah, so unfortunately, the agency was defrauded, and the audit found that they didn't have very secure procedures for wire transfers, which, those were like the safeguards to prevent this kind of thing from happening.
Yeah. $2 million is a significant loss.
Yeah.
So what's being done now to try and recover that money and make sure that this doesn't happen again?
Well, to their credit, the department has been working really hard to recover those funds, and they've updated their policies to try and prevent this from happening again. But it really just highlights how important it is to have those safeguards, right from the beginning.
Absolutely. Accountability is key when you're dealing with, public funds, taxpayer dollars.
100%, yeah.
What other areas for improvement did the audit flag?
Another thing was how they set fees for regulating manufactured housing. Believe it or not, they had recommendations from way back in a 2011 audit that still haven't been fully implemented.
Wow, 2011, that's a long time.
That's a long time.
What were those recommendations even about?
They were mainly focused on making sure that the fees for things like mobile home park inspections and licensing were actually set appropriately. It's important to make sure that these fees are fair and that they cover the actual costs of those services.
Right, so it's about finding that sweet spot where you're not overcharging people,
Right.
but also making sure that the department has the resources to actually do its job well.
Exactly.
Right.
And this kind of ties into a broader issue the audit found, which is grantee oversight. So the audit found that the department could be doing a better job of overseeing the organizations that they give money to. They need to make sure that those public funds are actually being used responsibly.
Right, so again, it comes back to that
It all comes back around. Yeah.
risk of fraud and that importance of accountability.
Accountability, yeah, super important.
Seems like that's kind of a recurring theme here, making sure that those dollars are having a real impact. But It wasn't all bad news in this report, right?
Oh, absolutely not.
There were some positive findings in there, too.
For sure, for sure. For one, the audit actually found that the department seems to be doing a pretty good job at handling consumer complaints, specifically related to manufactured housing.
Okay.
So there's this 120-day requirement for them to resolve these complaints, and they're mostly meeting it.
That's good to hear, especially when we're talking about people's homes.
Exactly. Yeah, these are important issues. And this is actually where things start to get really interesting because we're not just talking about, numbers on a spreadsheet. We're talking about real people's lives.
It always seems to come back to that human element, right?
Right.
We're talking about families that are struggling to pay rent, veterans trying to find a stable place to live, people dealing with the unique situations of living in a mobile home. I mean, are there specific stories or specific examples from this report that really kind of bring that to life for you?
Oh, absolutely. Take the data on this permanent supportive housing, what they call PSH.
Right.
The audit, it looked at this one program and they found that something like 677 individuals participated in just 1 year. That's 677 people, right? Each one has their own story, and they're all trying to find that stability, trying to find somewhere they can actually call home.
Yeah.
And some of these people, they've been in this program for years, which, that just goes to show how complicated these issues really are. And it's kind of fascinating, really, to see where they ended up. Some of them were able to move into permanent housing.
It's great.
Others were able to reunite with family.
Oh, that's wonderful.
But sadly, some of them did end up returning back to homelessness.
It really, it highlights that there's no easy answer here. There's no magic solution for homelessness.
Yeah.
It's complex.
Yeah, absolutely. No magic wand, unfortunately. And this whole audit, it kind of shows how important it is to be transparent and to have that accountability. Like there's this one part in here it's almost hard to believe. Okay.
The department, they didn't immediately tell the Auditor General about that $2 million fraud.
Really?
Which is, that's a pretty big deal.
Yeah.
It just really shows why you need to have that clear communication, those really clear processes in place. So when these kinds of things happen, they're reported right away and they can be investigated quickly.
Wow. Yeah, you're right. When you're talking about taxpayer money, people need to know that there's that trust there, that agencies are being, that they're staying on top of things.
Yeah, absolutely. That trust is, it's huge. But hey, there's some good news in this report too.
Okay, good.
So the audit, it actually highlights some really commendable stuff that the department is doing to address this affordable housing issue. They went ahead and allocated $190 million in state funding for this.
And they even held these public meetings to actually get people's input on the best way to use it.
That's great. That's actually really good to hear. That's a significant amount of money, $190 million.
Yeah, it's no small amount.
So what are some tangible things that they've done with it?
So they have this program called Arizona is Home.
Okay.
And this program, it helps people, especially people out in the rural areas, it helps them with down payments, helps them get lower mortgage rates, which, that's a big deal. That can really help make homeownership a reality for people.
Yeah.
They've also been using that money to fund the development of new affordable housing units.
Okay.
They've partnered with organizations, like Chicanos por la Causa and Trellis, just to name a couple.
Right.
And they're working to try to create more options for those families, especially those low-income families that are struggling.
So we've really got into the weeds here, the good, the bad, the bureaucrat.
Yeah, we've covered it all.
But I think the bigger question is why should the average person even care about what's going on with the Arizona Department of Housing? What's the takeaway for all of us listening?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question, right? This isn't just about numbers and policies. This is about the role that the government plays in tackling these big, these really complex issues like affordable housing.
Right.
These agencies, they're dealing with people's lives.
Yeah.
And how effective they are. It has real consequences for people.
It's easy to forget that when you're thinking about audits and these kinds of regulations. But really, at the heart of it, we're talking about people that need a safe and affordable place to live.
Exactly. And the thing is, the recommendations that they made in this audit, if the department actually implements them, they could actually really improve the lives of everyday people living in Arizona.
Yeah.
It highlights how important it is to measure performance, to have that accountability, that transparency, to make sure these agencies are actually doing what they're supposed to be doing for the people.
It's like you were saying at the very beginning, It's about how those policies actually become real world change, how they actually affect people. We've covered a lot in this deep dive.
Yeah.
Like you said, we've talked about some potential fraud, but also some really heartwarming stories
Yeah.
about people getting the help that they need.
We did, and that's really what I love about these kinds of deep dives. It's not just about hearing all this information.
Right.
It's about, maybe sparking some curiosity in you, getting you to look at these things in a new way.
Speaking of curiosity, this deep dive, it's really kind of sparked a question for me. This report mentioned something called the department's role in dealing with these federal low-income housing tax credits.
Right.
And I got to admit, I don't totally get how those work. They sound important, though.
Yeah, they're pretty interesting, actually. So these tax credits, they're a really powerful tool to encourage developers to actually go ahead and build affordable housing. But, and here's the catch, how well they actually work depends on a lot of different things. Like, there's this whole web of policies, and then you got to consider how the market's doing.
Right, right.
It's complicated.
So it's not just giving away free money. It's more about creating the right incentives and then making sure that they're actually working the way they're supposed to.
Exactly, yeah. And that actually gets me thinking, what has been the long-term impact of these things here in Arizona? Have they actually been successful? And what can other states learn from what Arizona's done? Those are the questions I'm thinking about now.
It's we started with this big picture view of this agency, and then we zoomed in on some pretty specific things like preventing fraud and stuff.
Yeah.
But now we're looking at this a whole other layer, the long-term effects of these tax credits.
Yeah.
It really shows you how much actually goes into creating affordable housing.
Yeah, and that's what I think is so cool about these deep dives. It's not about just memorizing a bunch of facts and figures. It's about sparking that curiosity, It's about giving you the tools to go out and do your own exploring.
So to everyone listening, if this whole Arizona Department of Housing deep dive piqued your interest, I think those low-income housing tax credits are a really good place to start if you want to do some more research on your own.
For sure.
Who knows what you might find? You might even feel inspired to get involved with shaping housing policy in your own community.
Exactly, yeah. It all starts with understanding the issues. Well, that about wraps up our deep dive into the Arizona Department of Housing. Hopefully you walked away learning something new today. But even more importantly, we hope you feel like you can keep asking those questions, keep digging deeper.
Because curiosity is key.
Until next time, keep learning, everyone.